on that later.
Good.
Welcome to Author Talk today. I'm super happy to be welcoming two amazing authors, writers with just loads of talent, worldwide awards. Super happy to be having Jim Jones, Phil Mills Jr. with us today. And they are writers of adult fiction, but both of them write children's books. And so I really loved the idea of bringing them together to discuss the two books. How did they think of wanting to do this in the first place? And what is that writing process a little bit like, along with the stories today? So first I'm going to introduce Phil Mills. He's coming to us from Texas today. He is the award-winning author of the Western novels Where a Good Wind Blows and Where the Wildflowers Dance. He's also known for his children's books Bandit the Cowdog, Mud Between My Toes, and Scooter the Cowdog. Mills is a longtime member of Western Writers of America, WWA, and currently serves as the vice president. And in a week and a half, he will be the president of this worldwide organization. 2010, he was a WWA Spur Award finalist, winner of Best Western Audiobook for his work of historical fiction entitled Where a Good Wind Blows. Mills also received a WWA Spur Finalist Award in the 2021 in the category Best Storyteller Illustrated for his children's book, Bandit the Cowdog. This book also earned the 2021 Will Rogers Gold Medallion for Western Fiction, Young Readers / Illustrated. Phil's most recent endeavor was his contribution to an anthology of Western mystery short stories novelists entitled Perilous Frontier, released in November 2021. Both of our authors today have short stories in that anthology. And I think Phil's story for that is up for a Will Rogers Medallion. The third book in his Good Wind Western series, entitled Where Cold the Waters Run, I think I got that right, is currently being written. He's also currently working on a book of short stories, 2 new children's books, a book of inspirational poetry, and a new novel entitled The Laramie Letter. Mills is a member of the Montana Historical Society and is a lifetime member of the Custer Battlefield Historical and Museum. He is also a member of the Oregon-California Trails Association, the Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators. He's an avid fan of professional rodeo, and in 2016 attended the Chad Nicholson Rodeo Announcer Seminar in Fort Worth. He spent the summer of 2016 and the early spring of 2017 announcing rodeos in Bandera, Texas, the cowboy capital of the world. His experiences include being a small town newspaper editor, farm magazine editor, and work with 2 major advertising public relations agencies. Phil and his wife Sonia live in Fort Worth, Texas. His book, Bandit the Cowdog, this is the summary of that. Spending the summer on her grandparents' Wyoming ranch was a new and exciting opportunity for 10-year-old Mary Andrews. She lived in Denver, Colorado, and being around horses and cattle every day was a different experience. Having to do daily chores like gathering eggs and keeping an extra close eye on her dog Princess was also new. She found it hard enough to just make her bed and keeping her clothes picked up. But life took a dramatic turn for the young girl when she was given her first horse. Mary had never ridden before, and there was a lot to learn. Thankfully, Bandit, the ranch cow dog, was around to watch over her. Bandit may have been retired, but he still liked herding chickens and trying to corral the ranch cats. Mary would soon learn having a horse was a lot different than having a dog. Along with such ownership came greater responsibilities. That would also mean learning to admit your mistakes, no matter how difficult, and then accepting the consequences, especially when Bandit knew the truth. We also have Jim Jones with us today. He's the author of 5 novels set in northern New Mexico in the late 1800s. His songs and books are about the West: cowboys, horses and cattle, cattle rustlers, the coming of the train, songs about people and land, rivers and mountains, the beauty of the western sky. With the 2022 release of his album Words and Music, along with the 2021 release of his album Good Days Are Coming, Jim has produced 12 Western folk albums. He was the Western Music Association's 2014 Male Performer of the Year and winner of the Western Heritage Wrangler Award 2022 Outstanding Original Western Composition. The International Western Music Association 2019 Song of the Year Academy of Western Artists 2016 Western Song of the Year, and Western Writers of America 2013, 2017, 2021 Spur Awards for Best Western Song. Jim lives in Rio Rancho, New Mexico. Welcome, Jim. His book, Bolo the Brave. After their encounter with the mountain lion, Charlie, Bolo, and Grandpa join a wagon train heading west. Charlie meets Chance, who is confined to a wheelchair. When Charlie sees a bully, Jed, making fun of Chance, he stands up to him. With Bolo's help, Jed backs down, but he's angry with Charlie. Chance doesn't appreciate his assistance and tells Charlie he could have handled the situation. Chance and Bolo take a liking to each other and begin playing together, which leaves Charlie feeling lonely and confused. When the wagon train gets bogged in mud due to heavy rains, Jed wanders off and discovers in Arreo, I don't know how to pronounce it, with a nest of rattlesnakes at the bottom. When the edge of the Arreo collapses, he slides down by the reptiles. Terrified, he yells for help. Faced with his life-threatening situation, the boys must set aside their conflicts and work together if they hope to save Jed. My name is Krista Suka. Forgot to introduce myself from Blue Cottage Agency, and I'm really happy that you guys could join us live for this recording. And I am going to stop the share screen and turn it over to Jim Jones, who's going to be discussing Phil's book. Take it away, Jim.
Well, thank you, Krista. And let me just say, since I know you're from Minnesota and you guys have ditches instead of arroyos, but it's arroyo. You were sort of close, but not really. That's okay. You're from Minnesota. Well, it's a real privilege and a pleasure to be here, and particularly to be able to talk with my friend Phil Mills Jr. But I think I have to call you Mr. President now, don't I?
Not quite yet. Not quite yet.
Oh, okay. Oh, but after next week I do, huh?
Yeah, that's right.
So, Mr. President. So I really enjoyed this book, Bandit the Cowdog. And I guess one of the things I wanted to start with asking you is the kind of question that I get asked, both as a songwriter and author, and whatever you write, people want to know, where did you come up and how did you come up with the idea? So I guess that's my first question for you is how did you come up with this concept?
Well, I thank you, Jim, for the question. And I want to thank Krista for having us and giving us an opportunity to visit here. The idea really started, I have 7 grandkids, and I wanted to write something for them that they could read and get something out of. And I wanted something that would have some sort of I guess, moral value to it, where they could read and get something out of it in terms of life lessons, if you will. So the best way to do that is I felt like through a dog, and putting that in there. Everybody likes a dog. And so when it came down to telling this story, I wanted it set in the West. I wanted to have the inexperience of my main character, Mary Andrews, coming out of the city, going to the ranch for the first time, or not necessarily for the first time, but a chance to go out there and learn some life lessons about doing chores and responsibility and et cetera. So, and my grandkids run everywhere from say 16, 17, all the way down to about 6. So I've got a range there that I wanted to be able to address for them to be able to read, not necessarily for that full range, but certainly the middle part of it. And get something out of it. So I went that direction.
Well, you did a fine job with that. There's a couple of things that I noticed that to me are related. One is just in your descriptions of the surroundings and the West. I just was really impressed with how you just painted the picture with your words. It really tickled me because it's set on the Encampment River in southern Wyoming. I'm actually going to be up there next month performing music, and I've been up there many times. And you nailed it. I mean, you describe it, and it sort of evokes that, the imagination of the kids to start thinking about what does that look like. And then as a part of that, with an illustrated book, I was going to ask you more about your illustrations and your illustrator and that whole process, because I love the illustrations in the book too. So maybe you could talk about that.
I was very fortunate there, and going back to the descriptions, I think one of the things, and I'm sure you've run into it too, in writing our novels. Um, I lived for a long time in Georgia and now in Texas, and so you have to study those areas very carefully if you're going to include that information in a novel, for example. So it was very easy because my other two books are set in Wyoming already. So I had been out there many times and already had a feel for what that area was like, what it looked like. And so I was able to bring that into the story for the children's book. Then, as far as the illustrator is concerned, I had the fortune of the publisher that I was working with sent me the portfolios about 7 or 8 different artists, and then I picked the one that I felt like that would best do the job I wanted on this book. And then I was fortunate that she was willing to work in very close collaboration with me in making suggestions on different things to put in some of the art that I hadn't even thought of. And because she read the story and then was able to say, "All right, how about we do this? How about we do that?" I was able to make suggestions. She made suggestions, and the final piece I was very proud of because she did a great job. And I think you can only do that if you're working closely with your artist.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I was just thinking about some of the things I really loved about the illustrations. I mean, she captures the expressions of Bandit, and dogs are so expressive. You know, they smile and they make funny faces. And my dog Ruby, who may join us at some point because I never know, she does a little. She's really timid, and so she doesn't want to like growl at me or bark, but she'll kind of snarl and then make it go away. It's like she makes a little snarly face. And your illustrator really just captured those expressions, I thought, and the personality. I mean, that it helped communicate the personality of Bandit. I don't know.
Yeah, I thought so too. I thought so too because, as I say early in the book, he's semi-retired on this ranch. They don't ask him to do a whole lot at this point, but he still likes to because he's one of those dogs, Australian Shepherd, that likes to herd and collect and gather and whatever. So he's either doing that with the chickens or the cats or something. And so you can kind of get a sense of his personality. He likes to have fun, and then he does all in a sense of fun. So when I say he's smiling, I can almost picture him smiling. And at the very end of the book, it talks about him smiling.
Yeah, that's part of what's so appealing about dogs is they just are so expressive. Another thing in your descriptions, and I know, and we'll get to this in just a second in terms of values and character education messages and that sort of thing. But I really thought that that you described ranch life, you described kind of the routine and what's involved in it and that sort of thing. Well, and it really fit with your concept of a city kid spending some time out in the country and what there is for kids to learn when they go to a different environment and a different context than they're used to. I guess there's a question in there. I don't know what were you thinking about when you
well, I had the advantage of growing up on a farm in Missouri, and so I'm very familiar with the many of the things that I put in some of my stories, like gathering eggs and things of that nature. And we had dogs, and so I was familiar with some of that. My dad was born in Montana. In fact, he was born about 30 miles or so south of Great Falls, where we're going to be next week for the Western Writers. And so I've been out there many times and seen that kind of country, and I knew I wanted to include that in describing where this was. So all of that came to fruition, I think, or at least I tried to make it happen in some of the writing I was doing.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of just the writing part itself, and we were having a conversation about this the other day, and as we both write novels for adults, and it's a challenge. I find it a challenge, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on how you dealt with it in terms of writing for kids and making it clear, making it understandable to them, but not writing down to them. Maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, I agree. And I was going to ask you the same question here in a minute, but you don't want to dumb it down to them because they're very smart. They're very intelligent on these things. I think the thing that I ran into most was making it relatable. In other words, the first book that I wrote, and I certainly learned from, I used my granddaughter at the time, she was about 12 or 13, as a focus group. And she just sat there and said, okay. And I almost could sense she was going to sleep as she was reading the manuscript. And I said, when she got done, I said, well, would you? Well, it was okay. And so I thought, well, that was a failure. I need to, go back to the drawing board on this. And I asked my daughter about it, and she said, well, did you make it relatable to her? Is there something there that she can have a tie to? And I realized that I hadn't. I just told a story, and she couldn't really relate to any of it. So I went back and changed, and I tried to do that with Bandit, something that where she gets in trouble, or where the dog gets in trouble. And something she could say, well, I've had that happen. I tracked dirt through the house or something, and I got in trouble for it, or I dug up the garden and I got in trouble for it. So I wanted that in there. The thing also I had to be very cognizant of, and I learned early on, was not to use words that they were not familiar with. For example, I used corral. Well, we know what that is. That's a pen, whatever, or remuda. And she had no clue. She was living in Georgia at the time. She had no clue what that was. And so I had to be very careful about using words that she couldn't relate to or didn't understand. I didn't want her having to run to a dictionary to find out what something was. So those were the two things I had to do: make it relatable and use words and terminology that she could understand without having to, what's this word mean? Or what's this word mean type of thing. I had to understand that not only Western kids were going to be reading this. It might be somebody in New York or someplace like that.
Well, and I appreciate Krista illustrating that for us in the beginning with Arroyo. So,
right. Good point.
Yeah. Well, and something that you did, and I tried to do this too, is if I was going to introduce a word and I felt like it was an important word for a kid to learn, to also use a synonym or to explain what it meant, and try to just kind of put that in the flow of the conversation. But,
correct. Yes. Make it a learning experience along with, so the next time they see that word, they have some idea what it meant.
Yeah. So there are very definite, clear value lessons that you're imparting in this book. And that, when I was reading it, it was clear to me. But is there a spot in the book that you might want to pick up and read a little bit?
There is a spot, and there's actually 2 or 3 spots, but there's one in particular. And I just happen to have a copy of it here.
Whoa.
I thought you might ask that question.
Yeah.
There's a point where she has gone out to feed the horse in the middle of the night with some carrots, and she leaves the gate open. And the next, she didn't realize she's left the gate open. She goes to bed, and everything's fine. The dog, Bandit, however, knows that she did it. The next morning, she gets up and goes into the kitchen for breakfast, and she hears her grandfather yelling at somebody outside, and so she quickly learns that he's being blamed for leaving the gate open and the horses get out. And so there's a point here where, and I'll try to make this quick. So Bandit looked at her with these big brown eyes as if asking, are you going to speak up and do the right thing? Are you going to say something even if it means you get in trouble? Or are you going to keep quiet and let this man take the blame? Mary was scared. She didn't want to get in trouble and not be able to ride paint ever again. But if she kept quiet and said nothing, this man might lose her job. Tears came to her eyes while Bandit sat and watched her, waiting for her to accept responsibility for her actions. What should she do? And that just happens to turn out at the bottom of a page. And I've had a lot of parents who have read this and shared this with their kids, said that's the point where they stop and say, this is a life lesson. Let's just have some interaction here. What should she do? What would you do? How would you handle it at this point? And it's been a good point for them to back and forth and discuss the rights and the wrongs of this. Should she accept responsibility for what she did, or let somebody else take the blame for it? And so I think that point in the book is one of the key spots. And it just happened to turn out at the bottom of the certain page. I couldn't have planned it any better if I'd have laid it out myself.
Yeah, sometimes it's good. It's better to be lucky than to be good, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. So,
well, and one of the things I really liked, this is kind of a spoiler alert, but you don't have to tell any kids if you read the book to them. One of the things I liked that you followed up with is that it didn't all get better when she acknowledged that she had made a mistake and that her grandparents imposed some consequences.
Right.
And it was a bit of a hardship for her, but it was also a learning experience. And I thought that was really wise of you to do that, because we don't want kids to get this magical notion that I just admit what I did and everything's fine, because it isn't always fine. And I thought you handled that really well. I was very impressed.
Thank you. Thank you. She was punished, and as a result, they don't let her ride the horse for a while, and she has to clean the stall, and she has to do these various, feed the hay and make sure he's watered and everything, and take care of him. And that's where at the very end, she's feeling good about herself that she finally admitted doing it, and that she did the right thing. She feels better by it, rather than just say, "Oh my gosh, I did something wrong," and whatever. So, and I've had a couple of bloggers who cover children's things who've written, in fact, some of it are on my website, I think, who have said the punishment that I illustrate here was fair. It wasn't overreaching. It wasn't whatever. It was fair. And as a result, as you said, it didn't go without some consequence. But in all honesty, being from the city, she probably thought it was a little rough, but quite honestly, she probably would have doing it anyway, since she loved that horse so much.
Yeah, I thought so too. And it was a very ranch style punishment in terms
Oh, yes.
Sure.
That's right. That's right. So
it was appropriate. So one of the things I know I struggled with, and I continue to struggle with, is people say, well, what age group is your book aimed at? What's your target audience? How did you figure that out? Maybe I learned something that I can use.
Well, I went, Mary is 10 years old in the book. So I went for an audience anywhere from 7 to 12 or 13. Now, children today, or at any time, probably there's some that are more advanced, that are younger, that could probably pick up on it. I have others that are maybe older who enjoy reading it, and because but I shot for somewhere between 7 and 12, 13 years old to do it. Now I had, again, going back to one of the bloggers, she had 3 kids, and 2 of them were older in that range, and they were able to talk about it, and they got some things out of it. Her little one was about 4 years old and could care less about any of the words or whatever, but she said really enjoyed the photos, the illustrations. So I felt from that standpoint, he or she, I don't remember which it was, will get something out of it going forward, and probably picked up something on listening to your brothers and sisters talk about it. So,
well, and one thing that I think is different about writing children's books, and it's easy to forget this, but because when I read a book, and even if I really enjoy it, I don't go back and read it over and over again. When you're a kid, you wear books out. And
that's right.
And so that 4-year-old who really loved the illustrations, in about 2 or 3 years, they're going to read that book, or have the book read to them, and have a different understanding, just because developmentally they're at a different place. And,
right.
And they still have that book. I mean, it's still there. And,
right. Exactly.
So what have I forgot to ask you that you want to talk about?
Well, gosh, I don't know. You've pretty well covered it. You've obviously read the book, because you know a lot of the details. I think you've covered it to give me an opportunity to explain where it came from. I wanted it set in the West, and I researched that area considerably, and I've got some potentially follow-up stories from that area that I can take Bandit down the road a little further, and probably Mary.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Krista, do you want to jump in, or anybody else? I don't know how you want to deal with this. I've sort of run out of my questions. So
no, I just think it's fascinating to, you guys have the different ways that you're using your literary skills, and going from fiction to a full novel, and then doing a children's book. It's like, to me, the children's book would be more difficult, because you have so many less words, and you have to get that story line and the characters and everybody developed in just this short little space. So I would think that in terms of, I always encourage authors to write different kinds of work, because it probably does help you in your other writing. And then your short story that you both submitted or have published in the
Perilous Frontier.
Perilous Frontiers, you know, too, what an art form it is, and to really study your craft and be able to get a short story written as opposed to a novel, as opposed to so I really admire both of you for putting your work out there in different forms and experimenting with different types of writing. And obviously you both are very talented writers, and with Jim and his music as well. And just that you continue to do that, and when just and submitting your work, and you just continue to get awards. And I was joking with him, like the bios, and I work with both of you for years. It's like our bios are getting so long, but it's like we need to shorten these up, but we can. I mean, there's just so many great things that you guys are doing. So I guess that's all really a good thing. And then, so Phil, with the next book, are you working on a children's book right now, right?
Actually, I am working on one. Actually, it's been written. It has not been illustrated yet. So it's ready to go. And it's a little bit shorter than Bandit, because I wanted to cut the number of words a little bit. But yeah, I was encouraged based on an experience I had in high school. I wanted to, it's called The Story. And this boy, he tells a lie, and he gets caught in the lie. And should he fess up, or what should he do? And so it's again, it's called The Story, and it goes back to something I did in high school. And I told a story, and I got away with it. He doesn't.
Yes.
Until now.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested in hearing about Jim. So Phil, do you want to talk to Jim about his book and his
Sure,
writing
I'd
process?
be happy to. Well, first of all, as you pointed out already, Jim is a best-selling author, numerous awards. He's an award-winning musician with all kinds of awards. So why write a children's book? What made you do that, Jim?
Well, as I surprised Krista the other day. I guess I didn't, because I sort of left that career behind. But for many, many years, I was a therapist for children and adolescents, and so I worked with kids all my life, and you can't do that for that long without learning a whole lot, and also really enjoying the way kids see the world. And so that was a big part of it. For a long time, I had thought about writing a children's book, and then I have to give some credit where it's due. Number one credit goes to the dog that inspired my main character, Bolo, who has a crooked nose. We had a dog, his name was Coulter, and he had a congenital defect. His nose took a left turn. I mean, he was kind of like a German Shepherd mix looking dog, but his nose just went left. And he was kind of goofy, as is Bolo, but at the same time, very loyal and loving and everything. So he was kind of the inspiration, but he also did some things. And one day, this was pretty serious, had a check made out to the IRS in an envelope sitting on the table by the door, and Coulter ate the check. I mean, he ate the check. And I was really a bit disappointed in him. And rather than, get a stick and beat him or something, I decided to express my frustration publicly. So I put on my Facebook page, and I've been watching NCIS, and so I was familiar with the term, be on the lookout, Bolo, be aware of this, he's wanted by the FBI for tampering with the IRS and all this stuff. Well, I have a music manager in Austin, Texas, Charlie Stewart, and he saw it, and this is the way his mind works. He thought that was the dog's name. He thought his name was Bolo. And so he calls me and says, I got a great idea. You need to have this dog Bolo, and you need to have his friend. He finds his friend Charlie, who's in a chuck wagon with his grandpa going west and everything. And I'm like, well, Charlie, that's not the dog's name. He said, I don't care. And so, so that's how the idea actually started. And then like you, then I was thinking about, well, I want to make it an entertaining story. and relatable to kids that also want to include in their messages about, in the first book, Bolo the Brave, he ends up has to deal with the loss of his parents, being lonely, and Bolo meets his needs for a friend, and also helps him find the courage to do some things that are pretty frightening that he had to deal with out on the frontier. So, so Coulter, the crooked-nosed dog, gets the initial credit, and my friend and manager Charlie Stewart gets in his crazy, convoluted way for coming up with a general idea that I put down in words.
Obviously it worked because you got two great stories here, two great books. How about Charlie? Did you draw from real characters that you knew, or a combination of?
Probably a combination. Like I said, I worked for many, many years with a lot of kids. And so and including kids that have lost their parents and have
Right.
with those kind of things. So I was sort of familiar with what that would be like. Then, of course, they had to imagine it in the West, in the Old West, because it's set in the Panhandle of Texas in the late 1800s. But the feelings and the emotions that people went through in those times weren't probably much different than what we go through now. So
I know in writing and my Goodwin book versus my Wildflower book is a sequel. You've got essentially a sequel here with Bolo and Charlie. Did you have any issues with doing that? I know as adults, we have to be careful about describing our characters in the second book so much that the reader says, I already know all of that because I read the first book. But if you don't put enough in there about them and their background, did you run into that with these two books?
Well, yeah. And of course, I was sort of used to it because I write a series in my adult novels. And it's always a juggling act about, like you said, not putting so much in there that people say, I already know that.
Right.
But then not everybody starts with the first book in your series. And so you want them to get up to speed. And so, I think it's the same challenge in terms of, finding ways throughout the narration to fill people in so they know what's going on.
I know that's important with adults, but I'm not sure children really maybe relate to can remember from book to book that, well, I already read that type of thing, but maybe they do. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think, like I said earlier, I think the difference is that it's probably not going to bother kids as much because they read books over and over again. If they like your book, they're going to read it a bunch. If they don't like your book, they may not even get through it the first time. So I don't think they'll have as big of an issue.
Okay. In your book, it's been mentioned already where Charlie and Bolo meet Chance, the boy in the wheelchair, and the bully's picking on him, and they go to his help, but he's not grateful about it. What kind of message were you trying to relate there? He's not grateful at all.
No, he's not. And in the scene, the initial scene where Charlie thinks he's doing a good deed because this bully is picking on this kid. And actually, the kid's in a wheelchair. He's paralyzed from the waist down. We had to research, my illustrator and I had to research what wheelchairs looked like in the late 1800s, and they existed. And I didn't know. Until we started working on it. But what happens is Charlie kind of intervenes and tells the bully to stop, and he sort of expects that the boy Chance, who's in the wheelchair, is just going to be grateful. And he is highly offended because he felt like he had this, and he felt insulted that Charlie just assumed he couldn't handle it because he was in a wheelchair. And again, part of where that comes from is my friend, and Charlie is part of the deal I had with Charlie Stewart is I had to name the boy Charlie. So, okay. Charlie.
Okay.
But Charlie has cerebral palsy, and so he's dealt with the issue of having a disability all of his life, and also and being treated like he can't do things when in fact he can do a lot of things. He can do some things that I can't do for sure. But that's not something that Charlie, the character, was thinking at the time. He was really genuinely trying to stand up for this kid and was really baffled and hurt that Chance was offended.
Right. Okay. Now you've mentioned, and I thought you did an excellent job of Bolo filling a void in Charlie's life after the loss of his parents, et cetera. And he's now got his best friend, there's a point in their book that where Bolo seems to be spending a lot more and more time with Chance, the boy in the wheelchair, and Charlie's bothered by that. In fact, he goes back to feeling lonely and confused. What were you trying to relate there as in terms of?
Well, the way I set that up in the plot was that Charlie and his grandpa, who runs the chuck wagon, had just joined this wagon train, essentially. And so Charlie was faced with the same kind of challenge, talking about things being relatable to kids. If you're the new kid and you come into a new school or a new neighborhood or a new wagon train, and there are other kids around, how do you find your spot? How do you figure out how to fit in? How do you make friends? And Charlie had already been kind of struggling with that and feeling like he didn't quite fit and he didn't know why. And of course, Bolo didn't have any problem with that. He just assumed he fit in, and he went out and made friends. So that, again, that's part of, I mean, I think I agree with you. I mean, there's so much to learn from dogs. I mean, I think it's interesting during the pandemic, everybody's gone out and gotten a dog, including us. And there's so much you can learn about how to live your life. And so Bolo was kind of setting the example for Charlie. Charlie just took him a while to kind of get it. So that's really what I was setting up, is that Charlie's looking for a way to fit in, and he's having trouble seeing how to do that. And Bolo's trying to lead the way, kind of like Bandit was in your book, but you still got to figure it out, which took Charlie a while. But
So as we get into the book, though, Jed, the bully, gets himself in a bind, and initially Chance is the only one that hears him.
Right.
And then Charlie comes along. And is there a point at this point, and I know we discussed this the other day, where you feel like this whole thing kind of comes together in your book, where I don't want to spoil the ending or anything, but where you feel like the message you were trying to convey is really there?
Yeah, it really, I mean, there's a number of messages I was trying to convey. What happens is Jed goes up and he comes to the top of an arroyo, and it's been raining, and the arroyo is a big ditch. If you're from Minnesota, you wouldn't. And at the bottom of the ditch is this nest of rattlesnakes, and because the ground is soft, the bank kind of starts to collapse, and Jed starts sliding down, getting close to being in the snakes. So he's in dire peril, and he's screaming. And the only person, and all the adults are off doing some stuff, and Chance hears it, and Chance goes to try to help. And Bolo happened to be with Chance, so Bolo goes with Chance in his wheelchair and has to figure out how to get Jed out of the arroyo. And so that's part of the suspense in the whole thing. Is he going to be able to do it? And also, is he strong enough to do it? Well, if you see people that are confined to wheelchairs, their upper bodies, a lot of times they look like bodybuilders. They are very strong. And that was what we were conveying, is that Chance had some strength that other kids didn't have or wouldn't have had in that situation. So that's where it all comes to a head. And the other thing is that, if somebody's been bullying you, it's kind of tempting to say, well, the heck with you. But of course, when they're in dire peril, hopefully you're not going to, you don't want to do that. And Chance realized that he had to do something to save this kid, even though the kid had been really mean to him. And so there was that lesson too. Okay.
So did everybody become friends at the end, or what happened here?
Well, they were working on it. One of the things that happened is and so Charlie hears this big ruckus, and so he goes up and winds up helping Chance get Jed out of the arroyo. And then they don't just immediately become friends. They're, Jed is thanking Chance for saving him and apologizing for bullying him. And he makes a comment, something to the effect of, I would have never thought not just anyone could have done it, and you did it though you're in a wheelchair. And Chance gets mad again and says, you guys act like I can't do anything because I'm in a wheelchair. And there's kind of a moment where they both sort of get it and go, oh, okay, yeah, look what you did something, Charlie realizes that Chance did something that he couldn't have done by himself, even though he's in a wheelchair. And so it's kind of a moment of where they're all kind of on an even playing field at that point. And Chance feels like he's getting the respect as a human being that he deserves.
Right.
So then they work on becoming friends after that.
But Krista brought this up earlier. In a children's book, can't be, 300 or 400 pages. You've got to tell that story, and I know you've done an excellent job of getting really into some deep thought patterns and great message here in a small amount in a short number of words. And I think that's it. I guess the question I have then, do you have a preconceived message that you're trying to convey before you start to write a children's book? A moral lesson or something, or do you just kind of get started and let it go?
Well, maybe some of both. I mean, I start out with some ideas about what I'd like to convey, what the messages are going to be, and I find this in writing whether I'm writing adult novels or whatever. I mean, when you develop your characters and you get to know your characters, a lot of times your characters take you places you didn't think you were going to go. I mean, I've had that experience so many times where I'm thinking I'm going to write this character doing something, and then all of a sudden I'm not, because the character is telling me that's not what
True.
I need to be doing.
Yeah, I run into that.
Yeah, the other thing that, and I was thinking about this, we were talking about the whole issue of relatable and going from different, writing, different kinds of writing styles or experiences. As a songwriter, I mean, you only have maybe, a couple hundred words in a 3.5 minute song to tell a big story. And so you have to do a lot of not just telling, but showing. I mean, you have to create images that convey what you're trying to say. And, I mean, to me, whether you're writing a song, whether you're writing a full-length novel or a novella or a children's book, that there's some principles, even though the way you address it may be a little different, the principles are the same. And that is, you got to write a story that people connect with. And if you're writing to a 7 or 8 year old, you got to tell a story that a 7 or 8 year old relates to and connects to. And so, like that's the whole thing. Oh, and I'm like you too. I have a focus group. My grandsons are 12 and 10, and they were my focus group for the second book. And I had to say, look, I understand I'm your grandpa and I give you Christmas presents and you're going to want to kind of like schmooze me and everything. But in this case, I need you to be brutally honest.
Right.
And they're both avid readers. And so they gave me some good feedback. And but
I wanted to ask you this: with children today almost consumed by being on phones and playing games and video games, et cetera, sometimes they're sitting at the same table and texting each other back and forth. How can you or me or any of us trying to write children's books make them exciting enough or relevant enough to get them to lay down their phone and read a book? That's a big challenge, I realize. But
yeah, I mean, I think it's not just children. I just spent the weekend with 2 people who sat the whole time looking at their phones, and I was like, couldn't we talk? And I think it's the challenge of our generation, the world we're living in right now. And I think the best thing you can do is try to tell a good story. I mean, other than that, I don't know what you do. I mean, you just have to. With
kids today, and I noticed my grandson, one of them in particular, the first thing he does, he picks up the phone and gets on one of these games, and immediately there's action. They're trying to shoot somebody or whatever. In a children's book, would you agree that we somehow have to make those, not only with our illustrations, but the story itself, exciting enough right early on to make them, to get their attention and hold them? Because I read somewhere not long ago that in a short story, you have 3 paragraphs to get their attention. In a novel, you have 3 pages to get their attention. That's adults. Yeah. And in kids that are used to video games, would you agree that we got to do something to get them quick, or they're going to lay it down and go do something else?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's true. No matter what you're writing, is you got to do something to grab the reader. I don't, I think where I depart from that a little bit is, in from writing Westerns, is that, that doesn't mean you have to have a shoot 'em up in the first 3 pages. Although, I mean, I've certainly had shoot 'em ups, in the first 3 pages of some of my books, but you have to have something happen that gets people, like, whoa, what's that? And I remember, because you're the incoming president of the Western Writers. And I remember years ago, when I first joined the organization, everybody was kind of in a tizzy about ebooks and whether real books were going to go away, and were Westerns, the whole genre of Westerns, were they going to go away? And I was talking with my son, who is an avid reader, but he's also, he plays video games. He's he's of that generation.
Mhm.
And he was telling me about a video game, I think it was Red Dead Redemption or something back then, that was set in a Western world. And he said, if you create a universe that's compelling, people are going to want to read about it, and they're going to want to be a part of it. So if you tell good stories, you're not going to have trouble finding an audience.
Sorry, my dog's barking.
Well, welcome to the.
Well, I think that's a voice of agreement there.
Yeah. Or the voice will let me out. I need to go.
Oh, do you think
What is that about?
are children's books today, or at least the ones you and I have seen, are they conveying a viable entertainment? Are they a viable entertainment source today, or we're doing them and we're hoping they get read, but what do you think?
Well,
I'll chime in too on that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, go ahead. Jim.
No. Go ahead. I was just going to make something up. So
Just
go ahead.
okay. More people are reading today than ever before, and more books. There's more books out there. There's more people reading. And I think there's, a lot of initiative to get kids to read more. There's a lot of subculture that's working on that. And I just, thinking about how long it takes to read a book, as opposed to you guys and some of you others in the room who are writers, how many countless hours you put into putting words and creating a product and a book for our society to read, and how important, can't underestimate how important it is for writers to continue to write and continue to create books. And I love the fact that both of you decided to go and take your writing talent into the children's book industry and getting those stories and those experiences down. And I think that we're always going to compete for time and other things like video games, but there are, books still play a huge role in our society, and they are important. And just like you said about ebooks, that kind of, real books are on the rise back. Audiobooks are really going up. And so, having that, and I know Phil, you did an audiobook and won an award for that. And so just, keep that writing going to all of you. It's long and, very, a lot of long hours you guys put into all of that. I wanted to know, go ahead.
See, I think one of the things that may have helped me, and it's been a few years now, I did work for a newspaper for a while, and I learned keep your paragraphs short, keep your sentences short, make it as readable as possible. And we were told to write for like a 5th grade level, even in a newspaper. And I think that may have helped me at least a lot, because I'm already have some background in trying to keep it simple and get the facts out there and get the information in there without a lot of fluff. And I didn't realize that I'd be one day writing children's books when I was editing a newspaper, but it's worked out.
Did you guys you've known each other kind of in the same world. Did you talk about your books before, the first books, before you were going to write them? Did you have any discussions about that? Or are you both just individually doing these things, and then it's like, oh yeah, we each have a children's book?
I would say we went our own way, and just happened to come back in the same highway, but
Okay.
Yeah.
together.
Very cool. And then both of you have websites, Jim Jones Books, Western Books, okay, tell me your websites.
JimJonesWestern.com.
Oh yeah. And then Phil Mills
Junior.com.
junior.com. So I'll put that into the chat. If you are interested, Deborah came up with a great idea for Christmas gifts. It's if you want to connect with the authors directly, and they probably can do some signed copies, right?
Yes.
Directly from the author, which is super special. So connect with them. You can connect with them. Both of them write beautiful blogs. Their websites are amazing. They're both done by Corey Kretzinger of Midstate Design. Wonderful person. Bob had a question. What do you believe is the ideal length for a children's book? And how did you decide like your length and what you were going? Did you have like criteria of like how many words it would be for a certain middle grade, or?
Well, I started out, I wanted to keep it under 2,500 words. The second one that I was talking about a while ago called The Story, it's probably 1,800 words. I think we could be careful with the attention span, and that you don't, they just, I don't realize the illustrations help on that, but I think you get too long, they lose interest. That's just my opinion. So less than 2,500 words is what I'd say.
Yeah, I was kind of embarrassed because I couldn't tell you how many words are in either of my children's books. But they're between the second, this one, Bolo the Brave True Friend, is 35 pages long. And the first one maybe was a little over 30 pages. And like Phil said, that includes illustrations. By the way, I do want to mention my illustrator, Cammie Young. She was a friend, and she had done some work for a good friend of mine with some music videos, and she does almost like a caricature style, and I just loved what she had done for him. And so we worked together, and she managed to capture the personalities of the main characters, Bolo the dog and Charlie, and then the grandpa Will. I just thought she nailed it, and so it's been such a pleasure to work with her. And that's like you were saying, Phil. I mean, the illustrations help fill it out and tell the story, so you don't have to rely on as many words.
You know, and too, as a parent of 4 kids, I believe one of the things that's missing in children these days is the ability to cope with anything. You know, parents are just paving the way for all these kids. They don't have to cope and deal with anything. And then when something sort of big happens in college, their girlfriend breaks up with them, whatever, they lose their, they don't know how to cope. And I love that your books both are really dealing with these obstacles and overcoming them and consequences and touching on those types of things. Because I think, even when the children have the book, we're all learning from the children's books too. And the parents reading them or reading them to their children, and just, adding to that, as I see as a necessity for young parents and parents and kids to just be learning those skills and overcoming things. Janice has some commentary. She said, my granddaughter wouldn't read my Nancy Drew books, but she likes books about history. 11-year-old grandson loves baseball. He won't read baseball books, but he sure is interested in the conflicts between the empire and the parents. Conflicts between the empire and the parents. That's interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Janice. If anybody else has any other quick comments or questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or let us know about that. You also, if you do, for anybody that ever reads a book by an author, especially the independent authors, to do a review. You can review books on Goodreads and Amazon, and it really helps out authors and getting the reach out and the word out on their books, because there are so many more books published today than ever before. So it's a really great time to be an author, but you also have competition with other authors, and I always feel like cream rise to the top, but if we can help each other out in that way, that is really great. I want to thank Deborah Swenson, who's also an author with her first book and getting a lot of great accolades for her book, for co-hosting with me today. And the rest of you for joining in. This will be on YouTube in the next couple of days. And I want to thank you, Phil and Jim, both of you, just a lot to aspire to and to be inspired by. And I really appreciate you giving the time to us. It was really interesting to hear this backstory and about this whole children's book world of yours. So thank you.
Well, thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about our books. So
Yeah, thanks a lot.
appreciate
Appreciate
that.
it.
All right. Well, with that, I hope you guys have an awesome day and rest of the summer, and we will see you soon. We've got some more upcoming stop recording here. We have some upcoming